Hello, Roger Bisby here. Today I'm in Chartwell, which is the former home of Winston Churchill, our much maligned war leader. These days people have kind of got a revisionist view of Winston Churchill, which I hope to dispel some of that along the way. But really what I'm here for is to look at the building and to look at his bricklaying in particular, because I'm really all about buildings. And I think it's interesting here because we can see how this building shaped his view of Britain. His version of Britain, very different to where a lot of other people live, but this was a romanticised vision he had. And Chartwell is really all about the view. You look over the Kent Weald there. Churchill fell in love with it, couldn't afford it, went through all kinds of shenanigans to keep it. In fact, it was then put into trust. It was bought from him and he was given a lifetime's interest in it, and of course his wife as well. And then it turned over to the National Trust, which is where it is now, preserved for the nation. The original house was a hodgepodge of styles dating back to Tudor times. In fact, they say Henry VIII once stayed here. But it was cold, it was dark, and it really wasn't very welcoming. It needed a lot more work than Churchill had bargained for. And Clemmy, his wife, although she liked it at first, soon got cold feet and wanted out. But Churchill, as dogged as ever, kept bringing her back on board. Being an exposed location, that gable end was particularly susceptible to penetrating damp. They tried all kinds of measures to try and keep it out, none of them really successful. They didn't have storm dry in those days, obviously, but the cavity wall might have helped. But the whole thing was built with a solid 9-inch wall. So I'm not sure if this is the elevation that was causing all the problems or the other one, but it's hardly surprising because when you look at it, it's a mixture of different things. It's got a little bit of English bond in there, and if you look just here, you can see how wonky these are, and that suggests to me that Winston got up there on a scaffolding and had a little go, persuaded the builders to let him do a little bit, and then you see when we get to the top, it changes bond again, it goes to stretcher bond, and then completely different bricks, and then this strange trellis work that's put on. So I don't know, it's a real mystery, this one, and I couldn't really find anybody in Chartwell that knew anything about the building as such, so it would be good to talk to an expert, somebody that knows this building inside out. There's bits of everything in here. There's Tudor styles, Victorian styles, Edwardian, and then the bits that Churchill added. And here above Churchill's study is the old Tudor oak. This was actually covered in by a ceiling, and when they were doing some renovation, they pulled down a bit of the ceiling, found this, and Churchill said, yeah, I like that, let's have that. Open it out and keep it on display. It's a nice bit of work, nice bit of Tudor carpentry, beautiful. This was all the mod cons in those days, the old range. They often catered for a lot of people in this house, so it would have been a busy little place, and keeping that coal-fired range going and everything cooking. I don't think we realised just how hard it was to get a meal on the table in those days. No Deliveroo or Uber Eats then. And in the end, it defeated him financially. He tried to sell it. He couldn't even get enough money to cover what he'd paid out on it. And at one time he considered moving his family into the cottage and renting the main property out, but nobody wanted the main property. It was difficult to heat, it couldn't keep it dry, and it just wasn't an attractive proposition for anybody. So here we have the walled garden, and this is where Churchill practiced his bricklaying. And of course, it's now known that Churchill used bricklaying to stave off depression. He used several devices such as painting, bricklaying, just basically keep him busy. Interestingly, throughout the Second World War and his time as Prime Minister, he didn't suffer from any depression. So that kind of reinforces the idea that you've got to keep yourself busy. Depression hates a moving target, they say now. And this is quite an ambitious bit down here. Step down. I like the way he's protected the tops with the tile, the ridge tiles. That I mean, they're engineering bricks, so they wouldn't have suffered too badly, but even so, it's good to keep the weather off, and a lot of the time that's the mistake you see people making. They don't do anything about a coping or anything, they just leave it for the ravages of the weather. Now you can see here where you had to make up the beds a bit, where things went a little bit wrong. And if you're a bricklayer, you could probably spot where it happened. But it is really just a question of his uneven beds. It's in fact that if you look at that one there, you've got what, 6 mil, then you've got 10 mil, and then you've probably got 12 mil there. And so you can see that keeping course would have been quite difficult. So, you know, early days. So when Winston Churchill started his bricklaying career, he took a bit of instruction from local bricklayers who taught him the basics. And I think you can see a progression from where he started to where he finished. And I mean, one thing, he kept the face of the bricks fairly clean, I would imagine. These being engineering bricks, it's a lot easier to clean them off. The mortar doesn't stain them in quite the same way. His daughter actually acted as a labourer for quite a lot of the time, just him and his daughter out there laying bricks. It's a big, ambitious job, this, isn't it, for somebody that did it in his spare time. Again, look, you can just see here where the perps have got a bit big. Basically, they're just too big, aren't they? You know, you needed that 10 mil. Needed some kind of gauge, really. Rather than just laying the mortar on there, you can see he's lost it again. But I reckon this was probably his early work here. And let's see if there's a progression. Let's see if it actually gets better as you go around. And Churchill actually, much to the annoyance of some people, he actually joined the Bricklayers Union and was very proud to be a card-carrying union member, even though some of the bricklayers probably would have had him kicked out if they had their way. Now this is the original front wall of the house, hiding it from the road, and clearly it was the inspiration for Churchill's garden walls. But here you can see there's no coping, and the top course has suffered, and it's going to need replacing, unlike Churchill's. So if you fancy a job, if you're a retired bricklayer, they're always looking for volunteers. So here we got the main elevation of the house, the front entrance, with the drive going in and the drive going out. To add even more grandeur to this front elevation, Churchill picked this oak door surround up in an architectural salvage yard in London and had it brought back. It's actually quite a nice bit of work when you look at it, because it's got oak leaves, it's got little acorns in there, I think it's got vine leaves and grapes on the edge, but it's fairly ornate, and you can see it's been kind of cobbled on, the brickwork there, and the bracket suggests that somebody's just added that bit of brickwork just to make it stand out slightly, but interesting idea. And you can see that it would have been quite grand for all his visitors coming in and staying, as he had a lot of people here, like-minded people who were aware of the growing threat from Germany. And the absolute foolishness of our government in allowing that to happen. I mean, unbelievable. Churchill said we shouldn't call it the Second World War, we should call it the utterly avoidable war. And if they'd done what he suggested and curtailed Germany's rearmament, then they wouldn't have had to shed a drop of blood in defending these islands of France. So a lot of ignorant people who don't know anything about how he struggled to avoid war now call him a warmonger, based mainly on this very famous speech where he committed every man, woman and child in this country to the cause of defeating Hitler. We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight with growing confidence and strength in the air. We shall never surrender. Now, interestingly to me, the reason that he spoke about that confidence in the air is that even though he was outside the government and he was constantly criticising them for their weakness and stupidity in allowing Germany to rearm, he was instrumental in establishing a strong air force in this country. Under the guise of civilian aviation, they allowed the Germans to build what became the Luftwaffe. Of course, by the time Britain woke up to their tricks, it was a bit too late. The Germans had outgunned us in the air, and it was a matter of urgency for us to build up our air defences. And Churchill was given the task, even though outside the government, of chairing that committee and getting things moving in that direction. But he said, I will only take on the role if I am allowed to continue to criticise the government on all fronts. And in here was his studio, because not only did he like to lay bricks, he also liked to paint. People are very rude about his painting sometimes. And here he is, always with that cigar in his mouth, not always smoked, sometimes just a prop. I do not submit these sketches to public gaze because I am under any illusion about their merit. They are the productions of a weekend and holiday amateur who during the last few years has found a new pleasure and who wishes to tell others of his luck. During the war, when he wasn't actually here, he was obviously in London, and this place was really just covered up, and they covered these lakes, these ponds over with tree branches and all kinds of camouflage so that the Luftwaffe couldn't see them, because obviously the Luftwaffe knew that he was here and hereabouts, or his house was, and even if they were thinking he wasn't here, they would have taken some delight probably in just bombing the place. Because one of the books in his history of the Second World War is called The Gathering Storm. I can imagine him standing here looking out over the Kent Weald towards the Channel, towards Dover, and imagining Hitler appearing over that horizon. But he came back to it after the war, obviously when he was out of power, when he lost the election after the war, and came here to lick his wounds and write. I mean, that was a key thing with Churchill. He's a great wordsmith. I really love reading his stuff. I've read quite a lot of his history of the English-speaking peoples, and also his history of the Second World War, which a lot of people say, oh, that's a very selective view, but it would be, wouldn't it? I mean, I think all history is selective. What's the truth about anything? But it's sobering to think that he wrote in this house more words than Shakespeare and Dickens put together. He churned out article after article, book after book, mainly just to keep the place going, and it became more and more of a burden for him in later years. Now, when we look at ex-prime ministers such as Tony Blair, who go on to make an absolute fortune, even Liz Truss is doing all right. But these days it's now a ticket to riches. But it wasn't so with him. And of course, public speaking is now very lucrative, and in that Churchill was unrivaled. But sadly, there wasn't the money in it that there is now. Now, the man born in Blenheim Palace, although he didn't actually live there, at last had his grand house in the country, even though in the end he was the tenant and not the owner. And when he died, his wife Clemmy relinquished all interest in the place. And no doubt it held good memories for her and bad, but she would have made a sad and lonely figure rattling around in this house and walking in these grounds. So perhaps the time had come and she was well out of it. Now I like to think that Winston would be pleased and gratified to see that this house now ranks among one of the most visited of all National Trust properties. And I can only think that the reason people flock here in their thousands is for the man, for the connection with Churchill. And these people understand that times change and that he was in some ways a flawed character and a complex man, and he made mistakes. But he wasn't afraid to make mistakes. He wasn't afraid to risk everything in the pursuit of freedom. So what would he make of Britain today? And what would he make of our current leaders? Well, we can only speculate on that, but if you'd like to speculate, I'd love to read your comments below.